Well, good evening, church. What an amazing week it's been. We have been waiting for 17 months for an email. I've never in my life anticipated an email this much. Just an NVC, the National Visa Center, an email that lets us know we can go for our interview. We expected this interview to already have taken place early in 2021, and now finally it came through. We don't know if the letter from the senator Jeff Merkley, if that had any impact. We don't know. Either way, we are extremely happy, extremely excited. So what lies ahead for us now is the interview is the 8th of June. Next week on Thursday, the 19th of May, we're going for medical examinations, which is quite a story. It seems like they take x-rays of our chests, they take blood tests, they evaluate our physical bodies, they check our vaccine status, and they add any other vaccines that might possibly be missing. And after that, then we take that with us to the embassy on the 8th of June when we have our interview. So next week on Wednesday, we'll be traveling to Johannesburg to get that done. We are super excited about that. And I keep on hearing Charlie's voice in my head. You know, Charlie said, if I'll have to see it before I believe it, that we're going to be there before the start of the new school year. We're still praying that will be the case. Our police clearance is expiring on the 20th of May, which is next week Friday. So we'll have to apply for a new one, which we already did. And we sent a nice letter with that as well, so that we can have that expedited within 5 days, and so that we can take all the documents to the interview. If we get to the interview and we do not have our new police clearances, it's possible that there might be a delay of a few weeks, but that is still not going to stop this from happening. So we're very excited that we will, Lord willing, be there still in this summer. Thank you for your prayers. Please pray for the police clearance, and please pray for everything else that still needs to take place before we can be with you guys. We are super excited, and we praise and we glorify God for His hand in this whole process, for answering our prayers. Tonight, I would like to start a new sermon series, and I've been very excited to study this, and I started reading it, and then when I got this email from NVC, it sort of took me right off track, and I probably would have researched better if this didn't fall up. But in any case, I decided I would like to do a new sermon series. At about 500 years before Christ, there was a great and famous philosopher living in China, and people called him Master Kong. Master Kong. He started off his career as a bookkeeper, and then he became a teacher, and eventually he became the town's governor. People just hung on his lips. People respected his words. He had tremendous ideas. He became known as an excellent philosopher and thinker. This one man eventually influenced the people of China, Japan, Vietnam, and Korea in powerful ways. It's influenced their politics, influenced their governmental policies. It has influenced their ethics of the general populace. And he became the father of what is today known as Confucianism. The other name for him is Confucius. Now, Confucianism is a philosophy of life, a type of religion that is still preached today, it is still practiced today, although it has been updated by what is called today Neo Confucianism. So here's a guy in the East, about 500 years before Christ, making a huge impact in that part of the world. But at the same time, at exactly the same time, about 4,000 miles away towards the west, lived another man that is less known worldwide among the pagans today, and he doesn't have a religion of his own. But if you look at his story, he was far superior and more divine than Confucius could ever dream of being. Now, although Confucius had intriguing and captivating ideas regarding philosophy and ethics and governance, the man living at the same time on the other side of the world did at least two things, just at least two things that surpassed him and put him in another bracket of, let's say, amazingness. And these are the two things. He predicted the future accurately. That is something that Confucius never could do. Master Kong could never predict the future. And secondly, he could know and interpret other people's dreams. Not only could he interpret dreams, but he could know what you dreamt without you telling him. Those are two things that are incredible. I mean, these are things that only God can be involved in. Only God can know what you dream. Right? Only God knows the future. And so this gentleman on the other side of the world, although his name is not as powerful amongst the pagans of the East, he genuinely was a person who had God by his side. So one of these men was considered as a clever philosopher, and the other was considered a man with the gods in him. One is in the Bible, and the other one is obviously not. Who do you think I'm talking about? I'm talking about Daniel. And I feel super excited to study through the book and preach from it, from now until hopefully we are there. I hope that I will not finish preaching through the book until we are there. And what made me think about studying it? Well, I've got two young men that I mentor and have been teaching for a number of years, and that I baptized. And I've been thinking a lot about them. I've baptized them, mentored both of them, and both of them got jobs in the United States. And both of them at this moment are surrounded by pagans. Both find themselves in the company of people who don't know Christ, but both love God. And both want to do God's will. So I had 3 days in the bush last week that I went hunting, and one of the things that was pressing on my heart was to encourage and teach these guys where they were at. Because I realized they need it. They're stuck in this worldly environment. And I thought to myself, okay, what text could I study with them? So I thought about studying the books of Peter. Peter is really a piece of writing that was written by Peter to people, to Christians scattered throughout the Gentile world. And if you want to give those books a title, it would be this, Pilgrims Among Pagans. And so I thought there's some powerful advice that Peter gives to Christians who live among pagans. But Daniel also came to my mind, and so I started reading it. And I soon came to realize that God was directing me towards the book of Daniel. Why? Because he was a young man. He was a young man who trusted and obeyed God with his whole heart. He went to a foreign country as a nobody, was surrounded by pagans, was challenged by pagan ways, yet he stood firmly on his godliness despite his pagan environment. And God blessed him. God blessed him. God raised him to the third highest in all the kingdom of Babylon and Persia. If Daniel could maintain his godliness in a pagan world, rise to the top, then surely these brothers of mine can too. Now they are in, the one guy is Johnny, and he's on a ship in the Caribbean, surrounded by absolute godlessness. The things that he tells me is going on there is absolutely incredible. It's like these ships, these MSC cruises and whatever, the brand is of the ship, they are just breeding grounds for Sodom and Gomorrah. And the other is Rampai, whom I told you about when I was there, who's become a chef in San Francisco, right in the Bay, and he's got a trans person being his supervisor, and he gets persecuted. He's got tattoos on his body that mentions God, and he gets persecuted because he's a Christian. And so for these two men, I thought the book of Daniel would be a powerful way to encourage them through the life of Daniel. But so Daniel is this powerful example of somebody going to pagan territory and surviving there and thriving there. But how did Daniel do it? What was his character about? How did he handle people, opposition? How did he handle it when people opposed his spiritual life? How did he obey God? How did he handle adversity? Now, we've already studied chapter 1, and it fits so well with their situation. And I also thought, one of the biggest struggles that I picked up in Oregon is the growing development of the increase of godlessness or ungodliness, the increase of ungodliness. The future looks bleak in a way when you look at many areas of the United States. And we can all therefore draw courage from the book of Daniel to learn to stand our ground in God, yet be successful in a pagan world. So what I will do today is introduce the book of Daniel and to introduce the man Daniel. And from next week we will start dealing with the text verse by verse. So I invite you to join me in this process. Let's just briefly talk about the book of Daniel. The book can be divided into two. The first half of the book we can say is from chapter 1 to chapter 6, and that section of the book is filled with tales, some nice stories, Daniel in the lion's den. Chapter 7 to 12, they are apocalyptic visions and dreams, and they're a little bit more murky. And some have said, because of these visions, that the book of Daniel can be considered the apocalypse of the Old Testament. If Revelation is the apocalypse of the New Testament, Daniel is the apocalypse of the Old Testament. Now, some sections of the book are written in Hebrew and smaller parts are written in Aramaic. For example, chapter 1 is written in Hebrew, chapter 2 to 7 in Aramaic, and chapter 8 to 12 is written in Hebrew. And I think there are reasons for that, and we'll probably deal with that as time goes on. Now, we see the 12 chapters as follows. In chapter 1, we see the induction of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and Daniel, the induction into Babylon, as they are told, given food to eat, and they are taught the language and the culture of the Babylonians. In chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar has a dream, and Daniel interprets the dream. In chapter 3, there's the fiery furnace where Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego gets thrown into the fire. In chapter 4, we see Nebuchadnezzar's madness as he becomes an animal in the field. In chapter 5, we have Belshazzar's feat when a hand appears and starts writing on the wall above the king's table, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Parsin, your days are numbered. In chapter 6, we read about Daniel in the lion's den. Chapter 7, there's a vision about the 4 beasts. Daniel has a dream where he sees these 4 beasts. Chapter 8, the ram, the he-goat, and the horn. Chapter 9, the 70 weeks. And then chapter 10 to 12, there's Daniel's final vision. Now, what does the book refer to? When we look at the history in this book, what is the book talking about? One of 3 interpretations have been given. Some people have said it's about the exploits of the Syrian king in the 160s BC. Other people have said it's the Roman empire's destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And then other people still say it's events yet to happen when Jesus returns. And people generally, there are these different types of ideas by scholars in the book of Revelation as well. Some people say Revelation is about the end times. Other people say, no, it's about the reign of Domitian in the 1st century during the days that John lived. The question is, which one is correct? In a sense, ladies and gentlemen, they are all correct. The book of Daniel has been designed to offer hope to all future generations of God's people. It did so in the days of Antiochus' empire, and it has ever since. This is why Jesus could even use imagery from Daniel to describe and comfort the oppressive leaders that he confronted in Jerusalem. This is why John the visionary who wrote Revelation could adapt Daniel's vision and apply them to Rome of his day and also all future oppressive empires. And so the point of Daniel is that all generations of readers can find here a pattern and a promise. It's a pattern that human beings and their kingdoms become violent beasts when they glorify their own power, when they redefine right and wrong and don't acknowledge God as their true king. But Daniel also holds out a promise that one day God will confront the beast. He will rescue his world and his people by bringing his kingdom over all nations. And so for every generation, this book speaks a message of hope that should motivate faithfulness. I believe the most important point of Daniel was to offer encouragement to the Jewish exiles by revealing God's sovereign will for Israel after a period of Gentile domination. We see beautifully Daniel chapter 4 verse 17 in action throughout the book. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declared the verdict, that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over all kingdoms on earth and gives them to anyone he wishes and sets over them the lowliest of people. We see this right throughout the book of Daniel as 4 kings come into Daniel's life, 4 different kings, and all of them are governed or humiliated or humbled by God to show that he's the true king of the universe. Not only does Daniel give encouragement of God's sovereign power and rulership, but the book gives us a prophetic word. It predicts the future. Daniel foresaw the period from the captivity until the coming of the Messiah. Daniel dreamed about 4 beasts representing 4 successive empires: Babylonia, Persia, Greece, and then Rome. And so Daniel lived in the Babylonian and Persian period, but predicted the rise of the Persia that came in his lifetime, but also Greece and Rome and the coming kingdom through the Messiah. And if we look back at history, guess what? He was right. Confucius has nothing on this. Now, let's take this further. In chapter 12, the text predicts the resurrection of the dead. Daniel was right about Persia, he was right about Greece, he was right about Rome. We can look back now. History confirms it as factually correct. Therefore, we can totally trust the book, that the resurrection will be there. It was written before these kingdoms came to power. Therefore, we can take it to heart that the resurrection prophesied in chapter 12 will take place. We can trust the resurrection to be true. That's a basic quick summary of the book of Daniel. But what about the man Daniel? What do we know about this man Daniel? Well, Daniel was in the royal lineage of King David. He was royalty. We see the bloodline of David into the kingdom of the pagan. The bloodline of David enters the kingdom of pagans, and that I think makes the role of Daniel so much more interesting, because he's the king that God has placed on the earth, and his descendants enter the pagan kingdoms of Babylonia. Daniel was a rare combination of good looks and intelligence. He was a thinker. In the story of Daniel, we see how he became a friend of the pagan kings. He was a companion to those kings. He managed to rise to the top, even though he didn't worship the same God as these pagan kings. In his lifetime, he was friends with 4 of those great pagan kings. He was made 3rd ruler in Babylon. First was Nabonidus who was away when fighting the invading Persians. Second was Belshazzar, reigning in Babylon in the absence of his father. And then there was Daniel. That's it. He was 3rd in all the kingdom. Of the 2,930 Bible characters, Daniel is one of the very few well-known characters about whom nothing is ever written negatively about. Wow. Joseph is also another one. I would say it's just Joseph and Daniel. And if we had to pick anybody in the Bible that had a comparative type of experience with Daniel, it would be Joseph. Abraham had his Hagar incident. Moses struck the rock and was banned from Canaan. David committed adultery and murder. And those other 2 sterling examples of righteousness, Noah and Job. What about them? Well, Noah got drunk and naked in Genesis 9:21, and Job repented because of how he spoke about God. Job chapter 38 verse 2. But Daniel, we have nothing on Daniel. In fact, when his political opponents tried to get dirt on him, their only option was to make it illegal to obey God. They couldn't find anything dirty on him. In actual fact, listen to what Ezekiel thinks of Daniel. Now, Ezekiel was Daniel's contemporary. Let's read Ezekiel chapter 14 verse 12 to 23. If you do have your Bible, you're welcome to read there, or I'll just read it to you. Ezekiel 14, 12 to 23. The word of the Lord came to me, Son of man, if a country sins against me by being unfaithful, and I stretch out my hand against it to cut off its food supply and send famine upon it and kill its people and their animals, even if these 3 men, Noah, Daniel, and Job, were in it, they could save only themselves by their righteousness, declares the sovereign Lord. Look at that. Ezekiel places Noah, Daniel, and Job together. Or if I send wild beasts through that country and they leave it childless and it becomes desolate so that no one can pass through it because of the beasts, As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if these three men, Noah, Job, and Daniel, were in it, they could not save their own sons or daughters. They alone would be saved, but the land would be desolate. Or if I bring a sword against that country and say, let the sword pass throughout the land, and I kill its people and their animals. As surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if these three men, Job, Noah, and Daniel, were in it, they could not save their own sons or daughters. They alone would be saved. Or if I send a plague into that land and pour out my wrath on it through bloodshed, killing its people and their animals, as surely as I live, declares the sovereign Lord, even if Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they could save neither son nor daughter. They would save only themselves by their righteousness. Wow, you see, Daniel was an incredible character that Ezekiel would place him in the same category as Job and Noah. Therefore, I think Daniel's definitely worth studying. Daniel, not only was he this good thinker of the lineage of David, mentioned by Ezekiel in the same category as Noah and Job, not only was he friends with pagan kings, we see that he's the only person in the Bible that meets the two most powerful angels in the heavenly realm. He met both Gabriel and Michael. Nobody in the Bible gets that privilege. Daniel's on another level. Daniel also, what's intriguing about him is that he spent his whole life in exile. He was an expat for life. If he was taken captive at the age of 16, it means that he was about 82 years old by the time that he was thrown in the lion's den. Usually when we think about the lion's den, we see a young man. He's not a young man. He was an old man. He was 82 years old among the lions. So Daniel lived his whole life in Babylon and never gave up on his faith. He never gave up on his obedience to the law of Moses. And it's interesting for me how quickly people lose faith when they're in an environment where there is no church for them. Here Daniel leaves Jerusalem. He leaves the Jewish people. He leaves the worship at the temple and stays faithful to God his whole life in a pagan kingdom. Indeed, he was an incredible man. If there's one thing that we could perhaps point at him that would be a little bit negative, it would be this. He could interpret everybody's dreams, everybody else's dreams, except his own. He needed help to interpret his own dreams. And we're going to look at that. That seems to be about the only thing that he couldn't achieve in his life. Now, let me just conclude with some minor lessons that we can pick out so long from this book before we really get into it next week. Firstly, what we learn from Daniel, and you'll see this throughout the book, is that you don't have to conform to the world to be successful in the world. You don't have to conform to the world to be successful in the world. Daniel refused to conform to Babylonian ways. He didn't even want to eat their food. He never bowed down to their images. Yet he rose to third in all the kingdom and became a friend of the pagan kings. Number 2, if biblical past is true, biblical future can be trusted. The Bible has been totally accurate prophetically, from the prophecies of Jesus to the prophecies of Daniel regarding kingdoms. You can literally trust everything Daniel says because world history has proven that God lived and worked through him. And thirdly, the world can change everything around you, but nothing inside you. Babylon changed Daniel's name in an attempt to strip him of his Jewish heritage. He was taught a new language and a new culture, but there was no way that these pagans could rob Daniel of his faith and his obedience and his trust in God, the God of heaven and earth. And lastly, Daniel teaches us that we are temples. Daniel teaches us that we are temples. The Babylonians built temples so the gods could live with them. And when Daniel interpreted the dreams of the kings, the pagan magicians said He has the spirit of the gods in him. And they were right. They just didn't know which God they were talking about. And that is what Daniel did. His faithfulness to God allowed him to be a vessel for God in a pagan kingdom. Daniel literally brought God into Babylon by being a temple, a walking temple. And you and I can literally bring God into any environment we enter by being obedient to God. I look forward to study this with you. From next week onwards, I hope that this book will be a blessing to you. We love you, keep praying for you, and we know we will be with you soon. Love you lots. Bye.